Pranam to Professor Thanu Padmanabhan, who left us on 17th September morning. A legendary personality, one of the promising scientists of the country, an eminent theoretical physicist and cosmologist. KCST is organizing 1 week-long commemorative webinar series to pay homage to the legendary scientist of India, Professor Thanu Padmanabhan, and the webinar series is organized in association with Kerala University, MG University, Cochin University of Science and Technology, and University of Calicut in Kerala. This program is attended by faculty members, researchers, and students from colleges and schools, and also scientists from R&D institutions. Today, it is the third day of the webinar series and starts with a welcome note by Dr. C. Anil Kumar. He is the Senior Principal Scientist in KCSTE. The state level program is presided over by Dr. K.N. Madhusudanan, Honorable Vice Chancellor of QSAT. The memorial lecture is delivered by Dr. Tirthankar Roy Chowdhury, Associate Professor, National Center for Radio Astrophysics, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Pune, which will be followed by vote of thanks by Dr. Titus Matthew, Professor and Head, Department of Physics, QSAT. This program is blissful with the gracious presence of Professor M.C. Dattan, who is the Scientific Advisor to Government of Kerala. He is the former Director, Vikram Sarabhai Space Center, ISRO, and also by the gracious presence of Dr. Pradeep Kumar, Member Secretary of KCSTE, Professor Unnikrishnan sir, Professor Arvindashan sir, and many distinguished professors. Now, may I request Dr. C. Anil Kumar to start the program and welcome the participants, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ajit Prabhu sir. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the commemorative webinar series organized by the Kerala State Council for Science, Technology and Environment to commemorate Professor Thanu Padmanabhan, a legendary scientist of our country. His name is very peculiar. The meaning of Thanu in Sanskrit means small, but he has grown up to the level of universe. He was our first chairman of SAR committee and was closely associated with the council. On behalf of KCSTE, I pay homage to Padma Shri Professor Thanu Padmanabhan. Respected President of today's meeting, Dr. K. Madhusudanan, Vice Chancellor, Cochin University of Science and Technology. In spite of his busy schedule, he has agreed to chair this meeting. On behalf of KCSTE, I welcome you, sir, for this meeting.
Thank you.
Respected Member Secretary of KCSTE, Dr. S. Pradeep Kumar. Today's speaker, Dr. Tirthankar Roy Chowdhury, Associate Professor, National Center for Radio Astrophysics, TIFR, Pune. Dr. M.C. Dattan, former Director, PSSC and Mentor Science, Government of Kerala. Dr. Ajit Prabhu, Chief Scientist and Coordinator of this program. Dr. Titus Matthew, Professor and Head Department of Physics, QSAT. Distinguished professors, my dear colleagues, teachers and students. On behalf of KCSTE, I welcome you all for this virtual meeting. Dr. Tirthankar Roy Chowdhury is a theoretical astrophysicist working in the National Center for Radio Astrophysics, NCRA, of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Pune. Dr. Tirthankar completed his BSc and MSc in Physics from the Vishwabharati University in Shantiniketan, West Bengal. He joined Ayuka, Pune for his PhD, where he worked under Professor T. Thanu Padmanabhan on aspects of the large-scale structure of the universe. After completing his PhD in 2003, Tirthankar spent about 5 years in 2 postdoctoral positions in Susa, Italy, and the Institute of Astronomy, University of Cambridge, UK. He came back to India in 2008 and joined the faculty of the Harish Chandra Research Institute, Allahabad. He moved to NCRA, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, in 2012 and has been there ever since. Tirthankar's research interests lie in studying various aspects of cosmology, like the formation of the first stars, the evolution of the galaxies through cosmic times, the nature of dark matter, etc. At present, he is involved in the Indian participation in building the largest radio telescope in the world, the Square Kilometre Array, SKA. On behalf of KCST and all gathered for this virtual meeting, I welcome you, sir, for this speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anil Kumar. Now let us hear the words of wisdom from Dr. K.N. Madhusudanan, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Cochin University of Science and Technology.
Dr. M.C. Dattan, Dr. Tirthankar Roy Chowdhury, other distinguished participants, students and friends. Let me first appreciate the effort of KCSTE in organizing a commemorative lecture series in honor of Professor Padmanabhan. Professor Padmanabhan, a renowned scientist from Kerala, has contributed immensely to gravitation and cosmology. As we know, he was trying to reformulate the entire scenario, gravitation, from Newton to Einstein and to a new world. So, as from the Einstein theory, we know it's a space-time. He formulated it as space-time curvature, but Padmanabhan later found that there is much more to it. And he started correlating thermodynamics with gravity and has been moving on with a profound insight into gravity and cosmology. So this combination of thermodynamics and gravity has led to looking at the scenario in a much more microscopic way, and it could lead to a linkage between gravity and quantum mechanics on a profound foundation. He has been immensely involved in these activities of late, and we are expecting path-breaking results on these aspects. As we see, this is something like how quantum mechanics evolved from thermodynamics. From the classical thermodynamics, we have moved to Boltzmann way of looking at it. It is more like atomistic way of looking at it and introducing statistical thermodynamics and so on. So if you look at the development of quantum mechanics as such, I think Max Planck was working more on such aspects in thermodynamics earlier on. So that studies actually led to a description of black body radiation and so on. So that actually made the foundation for quantum mechanics as such. So this linkage of gravity on a much more microscopic level and its combination with thermodynamics, I'm sure could definitely be a path-breaking effort. Of course, we lost such an illustrious, brilliant scientist, and untimely deaths, as we all know. I'm sure his students and the scientific community, by and large, can take this work further forward so that we will have a very good understanding of the universe which we are part of. We at Cochin University of Science and Technology has very good relations with Professor Thanu Padmanabhan and so his organization IUCA. We started these activities very early. Our theoretical physics group in the physics department was very strong for many years. You know, Professor Babu Joseph, then Professor M. Sabir, then Professor Kuriakos, all of them deeply involved in this kind of activities and closely worked with the Professor Padmanabhan. And in fact, the other day, Professor Babu Joseph has been mentioning about his close relationship, and even as he was Padmanabhan was an undergraduate student, how he attended classes of Professor Babu Joseph in Trivandrum and so on. So later on, we continued that interaction, and we are still continuing. We have Professor Titus Matthew here, and Dr. Charles here, and other people in the theoretical physics group, Dr. N. Shaji, Dr. Ramesh Babu, and other young faculties which we have recently recruited, theoretical physicists. So all are actively associated with all these activities. So we have a very strong group, theoretical physics group, interested in all these activities. So we also had these activities. Our earlier interaction resulted in a IUCA center in CUSAT, which is still functioning very well. IUCA Center for Astronomy Research and Development. We are still continuing that very good relation and actively working. Our own group is working on gravity and thermodynamics relation and so on. So that in that sense, it's a big loss for us at the university, Cochin University of Science and Technology. So I'm sure we will also continue work in this direction, and we'll definitely work with IUCA also in this direction. So we also hope to, establish a chair or a center in honor of Professor Padmanabhan here in CUSAT, enhancing our strength in this direction. We're adding more people. That is what we dream about. Hopefully, that we will be able to realize. So once again, paying homage to Professor Padmanabhan, let me conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your sharing your memories as well as your knowledgeable speech, and also for promising to establish a chair in respect of Professor Thanu Padmanabhan. Thank you, sir. Now, with great honor and pride, may I invite Dr. Tirthankar Roy Chowdhury, the chief guest of today, to deliver his commemorative lecture. Sir, please.
Thank you very much. So let me try to share the presentation. I hope all of you can see this.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. So let me start by thanking the organizers for organizing these webinars. commemorating Professor Thanu Padmanabhan. I also thank all the dignitaries for attending the meetings in spite of their so very busy schedule. But I believe this is the best way we can pay tribute to the great man, Padmanabhan. That's by doing good science, by also teaching good science to future generations and having scientific discussions of this kind. Now, if you see the title of my talk, you will see I'm going to be talking about probing our universe using neutral hydrogen. So, for the most part of my talk, I will try to convince you why neutral hydrogen is so important in our universe to study it. And I will also try to bring out Professor Padmanabhan's contribution to this field, and maybe at the same time also some less known features of his research, which is probably not that discussed very well in this respect. So let me start by talking a bit about my association with Professor Padmanabhan, or Paddy as we used to call him. So for me, he will always remain Paddy, I think. Of course, I first heard about him during my university days. That's mid-90s, late 90s. We saw his textbooks, but they were kind of somewhat advanced for us. But we would read them just to see what this field has in store for us. And I joined IUCAA as a PhD student in 1998. And I always had this desire that I will work with Paddy if he agrees to take me as a PhD student. Of course, after joining IUCAA, I met him. He was he was a teacher in our graduate school, the first year of our graduate school. And then I approached him for a project which he agreed to take me. And then towards the end of the project, I requested him whether he would take me as a PhD student. I was in some sense almost afraid to ask him. I was not sure whether things would work out. And when he agreed, it was something like a dream come true. I was almost like waiting for that day to happen. So when in 1999 I joined for PhD, I mean, it seemed like there's nothing more I want. So of course that doesn't remain that way. I mean, once you get something, you want something more always. But it was really a big milestone in my life. So we decided to work on areas in cosmology and the large-scale structure formation in the universe. And I will explain these things during my talk, what I mean by the structure formation. Of course, I completed my PhD around 2003. And I left IUCAA for other research positions. And I kept on working on these fields of cosmology, structure formation, galaxies, and so on, very closely related to observations. Whereas around the same time, Paddy started concentrating on the emergent gravity, which you also heard about just a few minutes back. And in that sense, our research areas started to diverge. Paddy went more into emergent gravity, and I went more into something like cosmology and structure formation. And how I wish he continued to work on similar areas. I would have got so many more chances to discuss my work with him and maybe also collaborate. So this is one thing I often feel. I mean, I kept on feeling it. Of course, when I came back to Pune as a faculty member, I got a lot of chances to talk to him. And in many cases, I went to him for advice and suggestions throughout my career. Whenever I would be asked to teach a course, I will approach Paddy first and ask him which textbooks does he recommend to make notes from, how should I structure the course, what would have he done, and so on. So he was like always there. Although we were not collaborating in terms of research, he was always there for us. And he was like a strong pillar for many of his students and collaborators. So in that sense, we will keep on missing him. As I said, my first project when I worked with him was on aspects of semi-classical gravity, and this was my first paper which I wrote with him. It was titled something like The Issue of Choosing Nothing, a very fancy title. But of course, these fields were somewhat speculative at those times. And later on, I very rarely worked with him on these kind of topics. The topics which I chose for my PhD, you can see these were some of my initial papers with Paddy. And here we are talking about things like sorry, just give me a second. So we are talking about things like neutral hydrogen. So if you read the title, some semi-analytic approach to understanding the distribution of neutral hydrogen in the universe. And similarly, the other paper, neutral hydrogen, comparison of simulations with observations. So from that point of time, I got interested in this neutral hydrogen field, which Paddy realized how important it's going to be in the future. And I'm really thankful that he chose a topic on something like this for my PhD. And of course, these topics allowed me to stay very close to observations, in the sense that whatever theory we did, we could compare with observations and then see whether the theories are correct or not. And that is how the research progressed. So let me now go straight into the research areas of my work and try to give you a flavor of why we think neutral hydrogen is important. Why did Paddy choose a field of neutral hydrogen and so on? So let me start from basics, because I was not sure. I mean, the level of people who are going to attend this talk, at what level of their career they are. So I will start from somewhat basic. So pardon me if you think some of these are like too well known. So, but I will try to make the talk as complete as possible. So if you think about our universe, we know a lot about it, but most of it was probably done in the last 100 years when the observations started coming. And I'm not going to give you a historical account, but I'm going to quickly summarize what we know about our universe. So we know that when we look at distant galaxies, that's the galaxies far away from us, they seem to be moving away from us. They're not like static with respect to us, or not they're moving randomly with respect to us. They are all moving away from us. And this led to this concept of an expanding universe. In fact, there is a law which connects the speed of recession, and it seems that the speed of recession is proportional to the distance to the galaxy. That's a galaxy twice as far away will move away with twice the speed. And this is a law which has a name. It's called, earlier it used to be called Hubble's law. Now it's called the Hubble-Lemaitre law, because of these people really working hard to establish this fact observationally, and also giving some theoretical understanding around the same time. Of course, the theoretical understanding came from Einstein's general relativity, which Paddy worked a lot. So I'm not going to go into those details, but it's just that theoretically also we understand how this is happening. Now, there are many consequences of this expanding universe. And one of it, which is very crucial for observations, is something called the redshift of light. What happens is, imagine a light or some radiation like propagating through the universe, and the universe is expanding. What happens is the wavelength of the light increases with the expansion of the universe. So if the light was emitted much earlier, it would have been emitted with a smaller wavelength than what we are receiving it at. This is again a well-known established fact. Now, usually what is done is, I mean, again, I'm putting in some basic equations, but I won't really go into the equations in too much detail. What we do is we introduce a quantity called the scale factor. It is nothing but it measures the size of our universe compared to the present size. So if, and we call it A. And if that A, for example, is 1, that is the present day universe. If A is equal to 0.5, that means we are looking at the early universe where the size of the universe was like half of what it is today, and so on. If A is 0.1, it was 1/10 of the size it is today, and so on. And it turns out that the increase in the wavelength of the light exactly scales as the scale factor. So what we can do is we can define a quantity called redshift, which is Z, and it turns out that 1 plus Z is nothing but the wavelength at which we are observing, receiving the light, divided by the wavelength at which it was emitted. And this redshift, you can see, can be immediately related to the scale factor, or the inverse of the scale factor. So the smaller is the scale factor, larger is the redshift. Now, redshift is a quantity which is directly measurable, because we will be getting light from a distant object and it will show some features. It will have some lines coming from some atoms or molecules. And for those transitions, we know in our laboratory or in our terrestrial environment what is the actual wavelength of that transition. But we receive it at a different wavelength. Just by looking at this difference, we can measure the redshift, and through that redshift we can tell immediately that how small the universe was compared to today when the light started from that distant object, from that distant galaxy. So that's the power of this redshift. Conceptually, this redshift is very similar to this Doppler shift of sound, which you would have read about. Of course, the earlier the radiation is emitted, the more is the increase in wavelength and hence decrease in the frequency. So that really helps us in connecting. I mean, the moment we have the redshift, it helps us in connecting to the history of the universe. So most of the time, we cosmologists actually talk in terms of redshifts. Okay, the redshifts plays a proxy for time or the age of the universe. Redshift plays a proxy for the distance to the galaxy and so on, because all these things are related, and you can write equations which will, I mean, given the redshift, it will give all these other quantities. Now, of course, if the universe is expanding now, at early times it would have been smaller, so different galaxies were closer to each other. And if we go early and early in the history of the universe, we can think of the universe being like starting or beginning from almost a very small volume, like a point. This is the model of the universe or cosmological model, which is the most accepted and successful model today. It can explain a wide range of observations. It's called the Big Bang model or the hot Big Bang model. All competing theories of cosmology have faced some trouble or the other in matching observations. So we believe that this is the correct cosmological model, and of course it has problems, but at this moment there doesn't seem to be any alternative. Okay, what more do we know about the universe? We know that at early times the distribution of matter in the universe was extremely smooth. In other words, no matter where you looked in the universe, it would contain the same amount of matter, or the density. If you think in terms of density of matter, it would remain the same in every place. Okay, it was evolving with time, but in spatially it was very smooth. Okay, in every position it was homogeneous. That's the term one uses. And the best evidence of that comes from observations of what we call the cosmic microwave background radiation, CMB. CMB is nothing but the light or the radiation kind of left over from the Big Bang. Okay, it was like there when the Big Bang happened, and then many things happened after that, but this light was there and it is kind of everywhere, all pervading in the universe. And so. And when we look at this light and it's hitting us from all directions, it seems extremely like smooth. The CMB reflects the state of our universe when it was 400,000 years old. Now, this 400,000 years won't make much sense unless I give you the age of the universe today. Age of the universe today is approximately 14 billion years. So you can see this radiation is coming from that part of the universe, that state of the universe when the universe was, you can think of it as an infant. Okay, I mean, compared to 14 billion years, how small is 400,000 years? It was really early. But this radiation is coming towards us, it's coming like the intensity is same in all directions. And that tells us that the state of the universe around 400,000 years after the Big Bang was such that the distribution of matter was extremely smooth. So that is the first thing to understand. Sorry, that the early universe was extremely homogeneous. But there is a subtlety here. When we look at the CMB with slightly more sensitive instruments, sensitive like with slightly more, I mean not slightly, with more resolution, more advanced telescopes, we see that what we thought to be very homogeneous is, of course it's very homogeneous, but there are tiny fluctuations on top of that. So this shows the same CMB map, but now looked at very like precise sensitivity and resolution. And it turns out that there are these fluctuations, and this, how small are these fluctuations? They are 1 part in 100,000. So normally 1 part in 100,000 we would say, oh, I mean, come on, you can neglect it, it's just too small. But of course, with more sensitive telescopes, we are now able to observe and measure them very precisely, very accurately. And what we don't understand is how this would have arisen, probably because of some quantum effects. Again, something, I mean, this kind of things were very close to Paddy's heart. He would have tried to work out this generation of perturbations at early times in the universe. And I'm sure, I mean, the way he was working, he would have made much more progress in the near future. But in any case, for our talk, I mean, for this presentation, we won't worry about how they actually came into being. We would say that 400,000 years after the Big Bang, the universe was mostly homogeneous, but it has tiny fluctuations. Tiny means 1 part in 100,000, 10 to the power minus 5 in a language of a physicist. So this is the state of the universe at early times. You can ask, what is the state of the universe today in like more recent history? Now, these are studied best by galaxy surveys. So what we do is we go try to, use huge telescopes and try to observe galaxies, and we go and make bigger and bigger telescopes, observe galaxies which are farther and farther away, because they will be like faint, the light, they will seem to be very faint if they are farther away. So the light, the intensity gets diluted. So what I am shown here is result from one such survey. I mean, there are many surveys now which bring out this fact. Each point here represents a galaxy. Now on the sky, if I look at the distribution of galaxies, you can see they are not random. I mean, first of all, they are not uniform. They are not like sitting on a grid or something. They are also not random. There is something. I mean, there seems to be some structures. In the sense, you will see regions where there are many galaxies. There are regions which are like devoid of galaxies, which we call voids. And then the galaxies are, they are like arranged in a way that you can see things like filaments and sheets and things like that. So this very nice network of structures give rise to what is known as the cosmic web. This is a fancy name, but we think that the large scale structure of our universe has this very nice web-like feature with filaments and voids and whatnot, knots and so on. And that basically characterizes the structures, the large-scale structures in our universe. Now, this brings to the term, the large-scale structure formation or structure formation. The problem of cosmological structure formation can be in a simple way described in this, that at very early times, we know that there was very small, tiny fluctuations, but it was largely very smooth universe. But at later times, so from when we go from 400,000 years to 14 billion years, we see there are so rich structure in our universe. These are not tiny fluctuations. I mean, you see this complete voids and filaments and so on, as I was saying. So the question is, how did the universe evolve from such a like homogeneous and small fluctuations to a structure which is so rich? This is the problem of large-scale structure formation. So again, for physicists, you will realize that this is something like an initial condition problem. I mean, somebody gives you this initial condition. Can you write down equations and solve them and make sure that it arrives at later times to a solution which looks like this, okay, in a mathematical sense. Now, much of these calculations were worked out in 90s, 2000s, and so on. And there are a lot of technical details. Of course, I can't go into the technical details, but if somebody gets interested in doing so, you need to go and read some of the books written by Paddy. For example, one of the very first books on structure formation was written by him. So this is called The Structure Formation in the Universe. I think it was mid-90s, somewhat early 90s, mid-90s. And at that time, I mean, whoever in the whole world, whoever used to work on structure formation, I think the first thing they have to do is they have to take this book and work everything out. And that's the first step we all did. I mean, we used to have pages and pages of notes working these things out. Of course, I was so fortunate that I could always go to Paddy if I was stuck, because he wrote the book, he would know everything inside out. And then there was another book, which was this Cosmology and Astrophysics Through Problems. It was a very innovative book, where actually he would teach you the whole subject through problems. So he will build it with simple problems to start with, simple concepts, and with difficult problems. And the idea is you need to work that out. Of course, he also gives the solutions, at least to a large part, towards the later half of the book. But it's a very innovative way and a different way of teaching the subject, not textbook level. It's like you are giving problems, and if people work out those problems, they're in a good shape in some sense. And then later, he wrote 3 volumes on theoretical astrophysics. It's like a full course. And volume 3 was Galaxies and Cosmology. And that actually, in some sense, it was somewhat extended and updated version of the earlier book on structure formation in the universe. So nowadays, when students want to work with us, we go and ask them to read this 3rd volume of theoretical astrophysics, because it has more updated results and so on. So just to summarize the point, that if you want to understand how this is happening and what kind of mathematical tools you need, please, I mean, just concentrate. If you want to concentrate on one book, it's probably this Theoretical Astrophysics Volume 3. Of course, to be fair, there are also other good books in the market, and I mean, people try out various things, but it never amazed us, any of us who have interacted with Paddy, that how could he write so many things. And I mean, at the same time, he's working on so many different areas. I mean, with me, he will be talking about cosmology and structure formation, and at the same time, with other students, he's talking about quantum gravity, semi-classical gravity. And it's not only talking about our working, he's supervising PhD students on so many different areas at the same time. I mean, I can't imagine how a brain works like this. It's something extremely special. I mean, we are very fortunate to be around. Now, if you want a one-line quick answer, how does the structures grow? The answer is they grow because of gravitational instability. And I will try to give you a very simple example. Imagine there is a matter distribution, which I've tried to draw here with this blue line. And the matter distribution is almost same in all places, but it has tiny fluctuations. So you have to imagine this blue line as tiny fluctuations on top of this very homogeneous uniform matter distribution. Now what will happen is, wherever you have slightly like higher density, that place has more matter than the nearby place. More matter could be like infinitesimally more. I mean, it's not like a lot of more matter, slightly more matter than the nearby location. What will happen is, since it has more matter, it will tend to attract. The gravity will be like more there, and it will try to attract more matter towards it. And where will it get the matter from? It has to get the matter from nearby locations. So what will happen is, places which are slightly underdense will actually start losing matter to this overdense region. And if you wait for some time, what will happen is, this feature will become something like this. Slightly overdense regions have become more overdense, and regions which were slightly underdense have become kind of voids. And this will keep on continuing. This is the typical feature of gravity. It gives rise to instability. So even if you introduce small inhomogeneities in the matter and let gravity be the only driving force, what will happen is the situation will grow. It will grow almost out of hand. The more, wherever you put slightly more matter, will become like more and more matter, and vice versa. So the small inhomogeneities grow because of gravitation, and it's called gravitational instability. Of course, there is slightly more complication because at the same time universe is expanding. So you have to account for all these things. So all of these have to be put in proper mathematical context. And what can happen is, these things can become quite complicated very soon, and they are nowadays best studied using what we call n-body simulations. So you cannot really study using pen and paper very easily. You have to put in a volume, and you have to run it numerically. You have to do it in computers basically, and the better the computers become, the better these simulations become, and better our understanding. But the basic idea is still simple. What you will be solving is that the acceleration of a particle in our universe is given by the gravitational force, that is minus gradient of the Newtonian potential. I'm talking in terms of Newtonian physics. You can write similar equations in general relativity also. But the same Newtonian potential is essentially given by the same matter. I mean, the particles all over the universe. Okay, so this is like gm by r kind of a thing. Okay, that is the potential, and if you take the gradient, it will give you the gm by r square force. Okay, but of course there will be additional terms because of the expansion, but the basic concept remains the same. Now again, you have to understand like how visionary Paddy was. One of the earliest n-body simulations in India was written by Paddy with his student Jasjit Singh Bagla, who is now actually a faculty in IISER Mohali. Many of you would have interacted with him. And remember, this was, for example, the paper written in mid-90s, okay, where they were actually studying the evolution of density perturbation. And you see, this is the kind of features they got. They were in fact getting this cosmic wave. You see, I mean, think of these black points as galaxies, and you see these galaxies are actually sitting in these nice structures like filaments and so on, and then there are voids. So they could actually get the cosmic wave using this n-body simulation. And Paddy knew that this was an important problem, and he worked at it. Now what? I mean, almost 30 years back. And this, of course, many of us later worked on similar areas, thanks to Paddy. But again, this is something which probably is not very well known, and I wanted to bring this fact out. I mean, the Paddy's contribution in cosmology and structure formation, so profound they were. And I mean, just to complete, I mean, at those days, computers were, I mean, nothing compared to what we have today. And for example, running these codes will take weeks in the computers they have. Nowadays, what happens is you can run much more sophisticated code in your laptop in matters of like minutes to hours. So things have changed so much. And now there are so many sophisticated advanced simulations, but so early they could actually work out some of the basics so nicely. I mean, this is something really to appreciate. And this, for example, is the more sophisticated simulation, which actually comes as a movie. I don't know how it's looking, but you will see that as the universe evolves, this is a slice of our universe. Of course, this is a simulated thing. And you will see at early times like this, there is hardly any structures. And as the the universe evolves, you will see structures growing, and these white points are basically galaxies which are coming up and so on. Okay, so this and other blue regions are the voids which are showing up very prominently. So this is how structures form in our universe. And of course, I mean, there's a lot of effort which goes in running this simulation. But as I said, these simulations are much easier to run. And what Paddy wrote was just like an initial version of these things. Paddy and Jasjit wrote these things. So again, I mean, just the vision that person had. And then what happens is, what we can do is we can go take these simulations and compare with observations. So this is one such nice picture. So the red ones are predictions or the calculations coming from simulations. The blue ones are from one of those galaxy surveys which I talked about earlier. So this is, red ones are simulations or theory, blue ones are observations. Okay, and you see, roughly speaking, I mean, they look very similar. Okay, of course, this is a visual impression. What actually we would do is we'll go and work out mathematical like the statistics and so on, and then we will compare the two things, and it turns out that the two things match very well. So in other words, we roughly know how the structures form. I mean, we can write down equations, solve them. We have to solve them in a computer. We solve them, we get some results, we can compare them with observations, and now we know that these things match. So that gives us so much confidence in this, like the paradigm of this expanding universe or the Big Bang model, which I was talking about. I still haven't started talking about neutral hydrogen. So that is the, like the rest of the talk. So let us quickly summarize where we are. So if you think about some of the milestones in our universe, like 400,000 years when its age was after the Big Bang, we know that there were small fluctuations. They grew because of gravitational instability and formed the large scale structure. That's what we see today. This picture is verified by observations. The small fluctuations we see in the CMB, and these large scale structures we see in galaxy surveys. And as the telescopes are become sensitive and sensitive, we are seeing galaxies at larger and larger distances. But roughly, we have probed the universe using galaxy surveys from like today to early times, that is something like 1 billion years. Now, what happens is that this time scale or this phase of the universe, that is between 400,000 years and billion years, this part is not well probed by observations, because galaxy survey stops somewhere here and CMB is coming from that 400,000 years back, whatever. So there is nothing we have really directly observed in this region, though there are indications that we may have observed a few things, but that's a separate story. So this observing this phase is like called the final frontier of cosmology. People will like to go observe this phase and make sure that the story is complete. Okay, starting from CMB to today's galaxies, the structures which we see, the story we have made using computers, we just want to make sure that it is really right. And then something interesting happens at this whatever region which we haven't observed, because that is also at some point the first stars and galaxies in our universe formed. And that is a fascinating story in itself. We would like to see these first stars and how they look like and so on. So that is why a lot of effort is being spent in trying to like go and probe this era using telescopes, and at the same time work out theoretical models to match the observations as and when they come up. What you can do is you can actually search for the first stars directly using telescopes. For example, there is a satellite called James Webb Space Telescope, which will go up later in this year. And one of the science cases is to detect the first stars. And then there are other big telescopes being planned on the ground itself. For example, this is what we call TMT, or the 30-meter telescope, which will come up. I mean, there are controversies as to where it will come up, but it will come up. And this is very important for India because this is a multinational project in which India is a part of. And again, one of their major science cases is to search for the first stars. Again, I mean, I can't stop talking about Paddy because Paddy actually played a very important role in India's entry to the TMT project. He was the convener of an advisory group set up by the DST around 2008 to 2010, where their job was to actually discuss with various stakeholders, scientists in the Indian community, and figure out what is the best path forward in terms of these large telescopes which are coming up. This shows Paddy's interest in mega projects, which have become very fashionable these days, and he understood what is important from India and gave that leadership to the community. Again, I mean, the multifaceted personality is coming up, no matter what we discuss about. Of course, these stars, if we detect, will be good, but what will happen is we will first detect the brighter stars, and sometimes there is a confusion whether these stars are faithful representatives of the underlying population or not. So it's always better to have an alternate probe, and that is where hydrogen comes into the picture. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. When I say abundant element in terms of normal element. And these galaxies are all surrounded by hydrogen. Now what happens is, we can ask the question that can we infer about stars using the hydrogen? And it turns out that we can. There are several methods, and one promising way is through the what we call the 21 centimeter radiation. Now let me straight away go to what I'm talking about. So 21 centimeter radiation arises from a neutral hydrogen atom. Neutral hydrogen atom is the simplest atom. There is a proton at the center and there is an electron. Now, there is something from people who have done quantum mechanics will know that these protons and electrons have something called spin. This spin is not like our cricket ball or earth spin. This is a very quantum mechanical property. Okay, it cannot. There is no classical or daily life analog to that. Now, this spin, these can have only two directions, and it turns out that the proton and electron spin can be either parallel or anti-parallel, and depending on what they are, there is a small difference in energy of the system. Now, imagine if the system, there is somehow a spin flip, okay, it goes from parallel to anti-parallel. What will happen is the energy of the system will decrease slightly. Where will that energy go? That energy will come out as a photon or radiation. The wavelength of the radiation has to be 21 centimeter because that you can calculate from the difference in the energy levels. The frequency will be something like 1.42 gigahertz. Now, what you need to appreciate is this radiation will arise only when hydrogen is neutral. If the hydrogen is ionized means somehow the electron is knocked out from the atom, then this spin flip transition won't happen. Okay? This will happen only if the atom is in the neutral state. So which means if we observe this atom, we will be probing neutral hydrogen in the universe. This is already being done, for example, to study neutral hydrogen in our galaxy and nearby galaxies. But can we use it to study the first stars is the question. And that I will try to tell you through a cartoon like this. Imagine there are hydrogen atoms in the universe. So these are my hydrogen atoms. And there is 21 centimeter transition happening. So they are all emitting this 21 centimeter radiation. And they are reaching us. Okay, we are far away and we are observing this radiation. Simple picture. But now imagine that at this point you form the stars, the first stars in the universe. Now the stars will radiate, and that radiation will contain photons having energies larger than what is required to ionize this hydrogen. So these stars can emit ionizing radiation. And then what will happen is, if they emit ionizing radiation, some of this hydrogen will get ionized. The moment they get ionized, the 21 centimeter, earlier they were showing 21 centimeter radiation, and suddenly the 21 centimeter radiation will stop because there is no neutral hydrogen there. Now you may ask that, oh, these three hydrogen have ionized. Why isn't this ionized? This probably hasn't get ionized because it is far away from the source. So the light is not reached there, or light is, all the radiation is gotten exhausted for ionizing the atoms which are nearby. So now you see the picture. The moment you form stars, around that star you will see lot of hydrogen that is ionized. So those regions won't emit 21 centimeter. Regions which are far away from stars or galaxies, the hydrogen will still be neutral and will emit 21 centimeter radiation. So now somehow if I can map make a map of 21 centimeter radiation in the sky, what will I see? I will see some regions which are not emitting 21 centimeter. That means that those are the places where stars are formed. And then there are places which are emitting 21 centimeter radiation. Those are the places which are far away from the galaxies and stars. This is why neutral hydrogen is so important, because it will give you the history of the universe, when the first stars formed, how they evolved, how they grew, whether they started forming more and more. And this process is called reionization. Reionization nowadays has become a very active field of study because many telescopes are trying to detect this. And this is one cartoon. So on the left hand side, you will see that earlier structure formation, the galaxies are forming. Right hand side, it is the same slice, but now what I am showing is the distribution of neutral hydrogen. Now the movie will loop, but what will happen is, in the right hand side, the red regions are where there are a lot of neutral hydrogen. The black regions are where there is no neutral hydrogen. In other words, red ones are the 21 centimeter emitting places, the black ones are not emitting 21 centimeter. And you will see that places where we are forming galaxies, like probably this part, you will see that those parts are getting black very early. Okay, if you concentrate on one of these parts, you will see it's getting black. And these black regions are growing and then overlapping, percolating through the whole space, and then at some point it is completely ionizing the universe. Actually, in fact, we are living in a universe which is, the bulk is ionized. Okay, it's a plasma level universe. The neutral matter you see are all within galaxies. So the major portion of the universe is completely ionized. And the thing is, this ionization is tracking the formation of galaxies and first stars. So that is how we plan to probe the universe using neutral hydrogen. And this is a very powerful probe. Of course, whatever I'm showing are all simulations because we still don't have observation. What I'm doing is, now I'm making two models of galaxies because we really don't know how the first galaxies look like. In one case, I have put many faint galaxies, and in other case, I have put very few but very bright galaxies. Now what will happen is, you will see that the neutral evolution of neutral hydrogen is very different in the two cases. So that is telling us that how the neutral hydrogen evolves, the distribution evolves, actually knows about the kind of galaxies that ionized the neutral hydrogen. So that is one point to keep in mind. Now, what kind of telescopes do we need to observe this? Remember, redshift. So earlier the radiation is emitted, more is the increase in wavelength. Radiation is always emitted at 1420 megahertz, but the frequency actually decreases by the time it reaches us. So we have to make telescopes at this range, something around 50 to 200 megahertz. These are basically low frequency radio wavelengths. So that is why there's a lot of effort being spent in building big radio telescopes so that this radiation can be observed. Okay, so low frequency radio telescopes will do this 21 centimeter. So optical kind of telescopes like TMT will go and directly detect the stars. Whereas radio telescopes will come with a very complementary probe. They won't detect the stars directly, but they will detect the effect of the stars through neutral hydrogen through 21 centimeter. There are many observational probes of the 21 centimeter signal. For example, you can do a global probe, meaning you're not worried about the small scale structure. You are looking at the global evolution. And there are telescopes. You can do it using smaller telescopes. The Aegis, which actually gave out their first results, which have become quite controversial, but I won't have time to go into that. Then there is a telescope called Saras-2. This is being built in fact in India by Raman Research Institute in Bangalore. LEDA is another such telescope. So I'm giving some typical telescope. And then you can study the 21 centimeter signal using fluctuations. And then these telescopes are like MWA in Australia, LOFAR in Holland and Europe. GMRT, that's a telescope in India, 80 kilometers from Pune. This is like built and like maintained by the institute where I work. The NCRA actually is responsible for this. And this was built by another visionary, Gobind Swarup, who also passed away earlier this year. So this is the GMRT. And then there are other telescopes like CHIME and MEERKAT in South Africa. CHIME is in Canada and so on. So there is a lot of effort already being spent and is coming. People are spending more effort to build new telescopes to actually go and probe this 21 centimeter signal. Since I talked about GMRT, PADI again had a lot of connection with GMRT because these are two institutes. I mean, GMRT is 80 kilometers away, but NCRA and IUCAA is just across the road. People who have come here will know. In fact, PADI served as the chair of the time allocation committee of GMRT. So time allocation committee is nothing but you have this telescope and people submit proposals for observations. And there's a committee which will decide which proposals will be given priority and more time. That is called the time allocation committee, and PADI served as the chair in 2006 to 2009. Very, very important role he played because you really need to identify the most important and cutting edge projects, because otherwise the telescope will be wasting time in doing very mediocre observations. So that is where PADI played a very important role, I believe. So we know PADI as a theoretical physicist doing gravity and so on, but PADI had so much to do for these big projects, okay, be it TMT, be it GMRT, and often people don't associate PADI with this observational kind of aspects, but again, he contributed so much. Of course, there will be next generation of telescopes which will be coming up. One is SKLO. That will be in Australia. There is another telescope called Hera that is already operating in South Africa. And all of them will try to observe this 21 centimeter signal. And if I am just being slightly more technical, what one will try to observe is something called the power spectrum. Power spectrum is nothing but you take this field, you do a Fourier transform, and you take the mod square of the Fourier transform. That is nothing but you are measuring how much power you have at different scales. So this shows the map, this shows the power spectrum, and you see the power spectrum actually fluctuates as the universe evolves. Okay, this is the power spectrum of the 21 centimeter radiation, and it does funny things. We all understand why these things happen. These are all happening because of this growth of these ionized structures and overlapping and percolating and so on. And if you just concentrate on one scale and study the evolution, it will look something like this. Okay, so there are many ways to study this. I'm not going into the details, but what I wanted to show is that all these things are done by a code which we have developed. I mean, this is one on simulation. It's called Script. And this is basically a code which is publicly available. If somebody is interested, you can go here, download the code and try to play with it. And you can choose your favorite model and try to see how this reionization happens. Okay, so that's just an advertisement. Observationally, what happens is this is the same power spectrum now versus frequency or redshift. These are where the cosmological signals are, the predicted signals. These are where the observations are. So what has happened is the observations are not sensitive enough to go and reach here, but as time progresses, they will reach here. In fact, one of these observations will be from GMRT. This is one from GMRT. In fact, GMRT was the first observation in this field in 2013. This is their data. But later on, much better observations have come up, and two of the cutting edge observations, 2 or 3 of them sit here. This is coming from MWA. This is coming from HERA, for example. This is coming from LOFAR, and as time progresses, these limits will come down, and at some point we will start probing the actual signal, and then we will know how reionization happens. So that is the ultimate goal. The final thing I wanted to talk about is the SK. SK is, of course, an upcoming telescope. It's like the most ambitious radio astronomy project. It's the project to build the largest radio telescope. It will come up in Australia and South Africa simultaneously towards the end of this decade. And one of their science goals is this reionization and 21 centimeter radiation. This is a multinational project, and India is part of it. And in fact, often people use GMRT to use tests for SK. So GMRT is designated as one of the SK pathfinders, what they call. So in that sense, there is close connection between the Indian community and the international community, and we are kind of part of this SK. So this is another mega project like TMT, which we are part of. And when these things will come probably around the same time, and we'll have a lot of information about this final frontier of cosmology when the first stars form and so on. So essentially that brings me to the end of the talk, and I will summarize the things I wanted to convey. The first stars is the final frontier of observational cosmology, and one of the way to study is through signal from neutral hydrogen. And 21 centimeter observations will open a new window. Actually, we already have interesting results from the telescopes that are operating, but we are looking forward to the SK. And India will have direct access to the data, so it will be very interesting for us. Now, these observations have to be complemented by theoretical modeling, and since I am a theorist, I am more interested in this theoretical modeling. We have made very good progress, but we still have to go a long way. We need much more accurate and efficient models so that we can interpret the observational data. I believe Paddy would have contributed immensely if he had continued to work on cosmology and astrophysics. So, I mean, it's just that around that time he moved on to emergent gravity, which is of course very important and cutting edge. But I would have really liked him to keep on working on cosmology and astrophysics, and he could because his brain has so much capacity. So it always misses brilliance and insights on various things, and also his leadership qualities, as I have tried to highlight. So what I will do is I will stop here, and if there are any comments and questions or anything from your side, I will be happy to listen and comment on that. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, Professor, for the very interesting and wonderful talk. You have talked about or touched upon about natural hydrogen, why neutral hydrogen is important, and in fact you took us for a ride or a journey from the history of formation of universe, and you have talked about expanding universe and wavelength increase of light and that kind of phenomena, galaxy surveys. You have talked about cosmological structure formation, also about gravitational instability, ionization and reionization of hydrogen, and in detail about 21 centimeter maps and different telescopes. Thank you, Professor, very much. And may I invite a few participants for the interaction. Professor, I hope you will be with us for the interaction time too.
Yes, yes, I will be happy to be here. Yes.
Yes. Any questions?
So, may I?
Yes, Professor.
Yes.
Titus Matthew.
Hi, Tirthankar. I am Titus from CUSAT.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Yeah. In fact, it is a very interesting talk. But I have a couple of questions. First one, what is the redshift range you are probing this 21 centimeter line? Maybe an upper limit for that.
Yes, so the 21 centimeter line, if we want to really probe the formation of first stars, the redshift range will be, of course we don't really know what when the first stars form, but the redshift range which these telescopes will try to probe will be varying between 20 to 5. We believe much of this reionization happened between these two redshift range. By 5 we know it had completed, and it's very unlikely that it has started before 20. So 20 to 5 is a very conservative range. Everything would have happened in between that.
So what I think, you cannot do this kind of search around, say Z is equal to 1 around. I mean, my point is, can it be used to probe any of the properties of dark energy?
Yes. Okay, thanks for bringing this up. So this is a different probe and a different way of doing things. So what I didn't spend so much time here. So you see, I have divided the 21 centimeter signal into cosmic dawn. You forget about that. That is very early times. Then reionization, where I spend a lot of time. And then there is this post-reionization. Post-reionization is after redshift 5. Okay, redshifts below 5. Now in post-reionization, what happens is all the neutral hydrogen are sitting inside galaxies. So what you can do is you can go and try to detect neutral hydrogen inside galaxies, and there are ways to do that. And these two telescopes, CHIME and MeerKAT, have science goals. Also GMRT have science goals to do these things. Now you can ask, and this can be done till redshift 0. Now you can ask, how does it help in studying dark energy? The way to do that will be, you will be able to probe the evolution of what is called the power spectrum of matter fluctuation. And that power spectrum of matter fluctuations will be different if you are in lambda CDM or in a dark energy universe or a purely matter dominated universe. So that power spectrum has information about dark energy. So what we will do is we will go observe these galaxies, get the power spectrum, like many of the galaxy surveys also do, SDSS and other things. But now we will do is using neutral hydrogen, and that will give us some handle on dark energy. People have already done calculations, and that will be done with the SK also. And you can show that SK can play a very important role in complementing other galaxy surveys which are coming up, like LSST and so on. So yes, there is lot of dark energy physics also, but it is not reionization, it is post-reionization, and it's a slightly different thing. But 21 centimeter will play a role there as well.
Maybe it's supporting the standard model, lambda CDM model. Maybe.
Sorry?
Maybe it is supporting the
yes, no, I mean, we still don't have observations of 21 centimeter here. The observations which will be required to do this kind of studies. So once it comes up, it may throw surprises, so we don't know, or maybe it will just establish lambda CDM. But yeah, this is something to look forward to. And even in India, people have, we have also worked out calculations and tried to show how the future telescopes will make a mark in this field. But yeah, this is something I did not talk about because of constraints. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Tirthankar.
Thank you, Professor. Any other questions, please? You may kindly unmute and speak.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please introduce yourself.
See, this 21 centimeter line itself will be redshifted, right?
Yes, that is correct.
So how do you make sure that it is actually 21 centimeter line?
Yeah, very good question. Yes. So the question is in this way. So the 21 centimeter line will come. Will be emitted at 1420 megahertz, and depending on at which time it was emitted, we will observe in some other megahertz, 150, 200 megahertz. But at that megahertz, at that frequencies, there will be other radiation also. Our galaxy emits on in that frequency band. Other galaxies also emit in those frequency bands. So what we will get is like a combination of all the signals. Okay, there will be the cosmological 21 centimeter signal. There will be signal from our galaxy. There will be signal from other galaxies which are not 21 centimeter. Okay, it is emitting something else. Okay, so how do we know? So the way to know is to actually look at the frequency spectrum basically. So the calculations will tell you that the 21 centimeter radiation coming from cosmological signal will decorrelate very fast across frequency. So if you take one frequency channel, let us say 100 megahertz, and take a nearby frequency channel, let's say 101 megahertz, and then you take another frequency channel 102 megahertz, and what you do is you cross correlate these signals 100 and 101, 100 and 102, and so on. What will happen is this 21 centimeter signal will very quickly decorrelate, because what will happen is you will be probing the universe at different times, and as this time, I mean the two epochs become separated by a large like time interval, there won't be any correlation between those two epochs. So the 21 centimeter decorrelates very fast, but all the other astrophysical signals we know of will have a very continuous, almost power law spectrum. So they will be very well correlated across frequency bands. So that is the basic thing which we will use to separate out the 21 centimeter signal from the other signal. I should also tell you that the 21 centimeter signal is very weak. How weak? It is 4 or 5 orders of magnitude weak, 10 to the 4 to 10 to the 5 times. So in fact, if you look at the signal, you won't even see the 21 centimeter signal. You have to do something very sophisticated to bring it out. So this is the property of the 21 centimeter signal we will use. The fact that it will not correlate across the frequency direction as compared to other signals. And that will actually bring out, subtract out. I mean, we have to do very sophisticated mathematical tools we have to use to subtract out, but that is how we will distinguish between these two signals. So yeah, that is how it's done.
Thank you. I have another small question. What is the typical angular resolution of these new telescopes, 21 centimeter telescopes?
Yes. So what happens is these telescopes, so GMRT has, I mean, the angular resolution actually varies with frequency. So, I mean, and it depends on how the arrays are placed. So basically, it can vary from arc minutes. I mean, okay, I mean, you can make it even arc seconds map, but typically arc minutes is the resolution. However, for 21 centimeter signal, the signal, it turns out, I mean, you have to make sure that the signal also like actually rises above the telescope noise. It turns out that it is the large scales which are most interesting for studying the 21 centimeter signal. So for most of these telescopes, it's not the resolution which matters, but it is the kind of large scales which we would like to probe. So yeah, so the telescopes will have, MWA for example doesn't have very good resolution. Meerkat has slightly better, of the order of again arc minutes. So, but thankfully for 21 centimeter, the resolution does not matter. It's the large scale features which are more interesting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions, please? Questions, doubts, clarifications, anything? Professor, may I ask you a couple of doubts I have?
Of course, please.
Number one, what is your opinion or observations about extraterrestrial life?
Yes, okay. Thanks for the question. Yeah. Yes. So, of course, I mean, we will be really like amazed if the day we have indications of life from another planet beyond ours. Of course, we don't know whether that is going to happen in our lifetime or whatever. But what we know is we are in a much better shape than what we were in like 10 years back. We now have access to so many exoplanets, just to give you an example, and we'll have more with more and more sophisticated instruments being built. Okay? So we will have them. Now, what I think I'm slightly more confident. I mean, I don't know whether we will receive a direct signal from an intelligent being in the near future in our lifetime. I don't know. Maybe we will. But what I'm really hopeful is we will have signatures of like presence of very complex organic molecules in maybe a distant galaxy or in other solar like stellar systems or solar systems in our galaxy. That will already give a big indication that, I mean, since there are like complex molecules happening somewhere, probably eventually it would have led to some kind of life, maybe not intelligent, but some kind of life form. So that is one thing. Again, many telescopes are trying to do that, getting some handle on these very complex organic molecules. I don't even know the names. They are so complex. People who do this astrochemistry are experts on that. But this, I'm hopeful that we will have some idea about these things. Of course, if we, of course, there is no reason to believe that there doesn't exist intelligent life outwards. There must be. When we will be able to connect with them, I mean, nobody knows. But yeah, that will be a fantastic day.
Yeah. So another thing is, when I read about Professor Thanu Padmanabhan, we understand that he was fond of Indian ancient science and astronomy, Indian ancient astronomy and all. Right,
Yes.
Professor?
Yes, that is correct.
And if so, had he taken some theories which is proposed in the Indian ancient astronomy, which has propelled him with these latest theories? Any idea about?
Okay, no. I mean, of course, again, something you all know that he was extremely excited about the Kerala earlier Kerala School of Mathematics, discovery of calculus and so on.
Yeah.
But yes, whether his research connects to ancient Indian science and history, that part at least was not clear to me. I mean, to be frank, we had a lot of scientific discussions, but I never had anything to do with that. Maybe not. I mean, of course, he was extremely inspired by ancient Indian texts, Upanishads and all. I mean, we know of them. I mean, even his webpage has as many writings on these aspects. But whether that was connected to his science, I'm not very sure.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? We have 5 minutes more. So may I request Dr. Pradeep Kumar, respected Member Secretary of Kerala State Council for Science, Technology and Environment, for concluding remarks. Sir, please. Pradeep sir. Yeah, Pradeep sir. I think he may be busy with some. 1 second. Hello. Sir, ഞാൻ സാറിനെ invite ചെയ്തു controlling room. Okay. Yeah, he is busy with some other important meetings. Yeah. So now may I request Professor Titus Matthew to propose a formal vote of thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So we come to the conclusion of today's lecture in the series to commemorate Professor Thanu Padmanabhan, who passed away on 17th September 2021. Professor Padmanabhan is one of the giant pillars in gravitational cosmology, who initiated new theories, say called emergent gravity, to understand what is really gravity. Maybe after Einstein, it is a giant step towards understanding gravity. However, in the verge of completion of such a great theory, he had gone from this world, and is a great shock to all of us, all to the scientific world, and particularly Kerala. Today, we have Professor K.N. Madhusudanan, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Cochin University of Science and Technology, to chair these functions. And he shared his association with Padmanabhan Ayuka, and also some glimpses on the latest works of Professor Padmanabhan. Sir, on behalf of all who present here, we extend our hearty thanks to you for sharing your valuable time with us for this function. Secondly, I have to thank our speaker, Dr. Tirthankar Roy Chowdhury. In fact, he is a PhD student of Thanu Padmanabhan. He is currently working in National Center for Radio Astronomy, TIFR, Pune campus, very much near to the Ayuka, as many of us know. And I think he is one of the apt persons that we have to deliver a lecture commemorating Professor Thanu Padmanabhan. And as we listen to the lecture of Dr. Tirthankar, we were in a new world that he has been presented in a very lucid manner, with what I have to say, to be understandable even to a +2 school student. Such a pretty language that he has been used throughout his lecture. Sir, on behalf of KSSTE and on behalf of all of us assembled here, we extend our sincere thanks to you for sharing your most valuable time for us in commemorating Professor Thanu Padmanabhan, our great scientist and your own guru. Thank you, sir. Finally, I must thank all the dignitaries of KSSTE, starting from Anil Kumar, Ajit, Harinarayanan, all of them. It's a formality, so I thank them, and finally I thank all the audience who presents here in memory of our great man, Professor Thanu Padmanabhan. Thank you once again. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Titus Matthew. So request all of you to reassemble tomorrow at 3 p.m. the 4th day of the commemorative lecture series. And tomorrow the chief guest is Dr. Anil Bharadwaj. He is the director of Physical Research Laboratory, Ahmedabad, under Indian Space Research Organization, in the chair of Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor M.K. Jayaraj of Calicut University. So request all of you to reassemble tomorrow at 3 p.m. Thank you all, and the meeting ends here. Thank you, Professor, once again from KSCST and Government of Kerala.
Thank you very much for organizing this. Thank you.